Hi, welcome to Bava Kama Daf Bet Amud Bet, picking up from where we left off in the last video. Hachamai. Literally this means hear what? In other words, the Gemara is asking, now that we've looked at Avot and Toladot in two other contexts, in the context of Shabbat and in the context of Tuma V'Tara, hear what? Hear what is the relationship here in the case of Nizikin. What is the relationship between Avot and Toladot? Again, the Gemara has decided that we know there are Toladot because the Mishnah says that there are Avot, but we don't know what the relationship would be between Avot and Toladot because we've already seen two different models. We don't know what the model is for Nezek. Amar of Papa, Yesh mehen kiyotze behen, v'yesh mehen lav kiyotze behen. There are those that are similar to them, and there are those that are not similar to them. So Rav Papa offers an answer. And the answer is, presumably, it seems like he's saying, although the Gemara is going to explain this further later on, it seems like he's saying that there are some Toladot that are like the Avot, and there are some Toladot that are not like the Avot. We'll see more moving forward what that means. Tana Rabbanan. Gimel Avot ne'amru b'shor, Shlosha Avot ne'amru b'shor. HaKeren, v'Hashen, v'Haregel. There are three Avot that are related to shor. So if shor is one of the categories in the Mishnah, but there are three avot of shor, according to this Breita. Tana Rabbanan means we learned in a Breita. So our rabbis taught in a Breita that there are three avot of Nizikin that are related to an ox, and I'm highlighting this in red because it's Tanaitic. And they are the horn, the tooth, and the leg, or the foot. Keren minalan. Minalan is a very important question word. From where do we know about Keren? From where do we know that this is a thing? Oops. Tana Rabbanan, because we learned in a Breita. So this was the Gemara asking about Keren, and now we're back in another Tanaitic source. Ki yigach. The pasuk in Shemot says ki yigach, when an ox gores, ein yigicha ela b'keren, and there can be no goring except with a horn. Shneimar in Malachim, vayaso Tzidkiah ben Knana karnei barzel, v'yomar ko amar Hashem be'ela tinagach et aram v'gomer. As it is said in Malachim, and I brought you the sources here on this source sheet, so here's a source from Shemot, and here's a source from Malachim. So Tzidkiah ben Knana said that he made karnei barzel, he made horns of iron, and he said, this is what God says, you're going to gore the Arameans with these until you destroy them. These are symbolic of the fact that you're going to destroy Aram. So we have ki yigach in the pasuk about damages in Shemot. I brought you that pasuk as well. And we know that negicha can only come from horns because the pasuk in Malachim refers to horns as the source of goring. So this is all part of the Breita. Although, of course, you'd want to distinguish. Some of this is quotes from the Torah, like ki yigach, and also these words up to here, which I would put in yellow to indicate that they are actually quotes from Tanakh. So we'll do that as well. Ve'omer, and it also says in the Torah, Bechor shoro hadarlo v'karnei re'em karnav behem ami minagach. This is a pasuk from Sefer Dvarim, from the blessings of the tribes. And this one I also have on the sheet, that Bechor shoro hadarlo, it's like the eldest ox. It's majestic for him, and he has horns that are like the horns of a wild ox, and with them, bahem amimi nagach, that with those he can gore people. And this is, again, another reference to horns and goring. So this is also part of the Breita, and also a pasuk. Put that back up there. And it's also a pasuk. So I'll give it both colors as well. Ve'omer, and this is the second pasuk. So having finished with the Breita, with the second Breita, the Gemara then asks, Mai ve'omer? What does it mean, ve'omer? What does the Breita mean when it says ve'omer? Why are there two psukim quoted, both to prove the same thing, which is that negicha, that goring, happens with horns, and therefore horns are one of the primary categories of shor. So mai is a question word. It means what. In this case, what is ve'omer? And the Gemara answers, V'chi tema divrei Torah midivrei Kabbalah le'alfinan, tashma bechor shiro hadar lo, v'hai melafu, gilui milta ba'almahu. I'm going to punctuate it this way. Question mark, exclamation point, and then a question mark. V'chi tema, if you were to say, tema is you say, if you were to say that divrei Torah from divrei Kabbalah we cannot learn, in other words, we can't learn something about the Torah, about a category in the Torah, like shor, like Keren for sure. We can't learn that from Nach. We can't learn it from a pasuk in Malachim. You might think that we have that principle. Elsewhere, we have ideas like that you can't, that a pasuk from Malachim would not be a good proof text for something you're trying to prove about the Torah. And therefore, we have this tashma, we have this source that gets brought, right? It comes and teaches us bechor sharo hadar lo, and therefore we have the second pasuk, which is from the Torah and not from Nevi'im. But if you were to say that, right, if you were to think that, v'chi tema, were you to say that, v'hai melafu, is this learning? Is this actually something we're learning from Malachim? Are we actually trying to learn a halacha? Question mark, exclamation point? Clearly not. Gilui milta ba'almahu. It's just revealing a point. It's just teaching you something. You can certainly learn facts of the world from Sefer Melachim, from other Sfarim and Tanakh. It's not teaching you a halacha, so don't think that that's the reason that a second pasuk is brought. I'm sorry, it should really be Dinegicha milta ba'almahu, Gilui milta ba'almahu Dinegicha b'keren. It's just revealing to you the information that negicha, that goring, is always with a horn. Ella mahu detema. Rather, what is it that you would have said? Ki palig rachmana bin tam muad. When the Torah divides, when God distinguishes between what's called a shor tam, an innocent ox, and a muad, one that is known to have gored many times before, whereas a tam has not. Bin tam muad. Hani mile betlusha. That's talking about a horn that has already been detached. Aval b'mechuberet, but while the horn is still attached to the animal, ema kula mu'edeti. I would think that all oxen are, by definition, mu'ad. They're all apt to gore people. Tashma bechor sharo hadar lo, b'gomer. And therefore, we have this pasuk of bechor sharo hadar lo. In other words, the pasuk that is from Melachim is not necessarily about horns that are attached to an animal, where in fact they're really not. I mean, someone made these iron horns, whereas the horns in the pasuk from Dvarim, those do seem to be attached. So really, the thing that you would think, right? Mahu detema is a question. What is it that you might have thought had we only had the one pasuk? So if we'd only had the one pasuk, if we'd only had the pasuk in Melachim, you would have thought that when the Torah in Shemot and elsewhere divides between a shor tam and a shor muad, that's talking about, as in the case of Sefer Melachim, a horn that's already been detached and is presumably then not being operated by the animal anymore. But you might think that a horn that is still attached to the animal, well, maybe you think all oxen are kind of equal. There's no such thing as an innocent ox because oxen are wild animals and they could always go ahead and gore someone. Tashma, therefore, brings the pasuk bechor sharo hadar lo to teach you that in fact we're talking about an attached an attached horn, and even an attached horn is prone to negicha, but is prone to goring. But there's a difference between shor tam and shor muad, and since we realize that the difference between shor tam and shor muad applies even to an attached horn, that makes the second pasuk, the pasuk in Varim, also necessary, so that we have a source for goring that has to do with the horn still being attached to the animal. In terms of structure here, I would say v'chi tema, you could see this as a challenge or part of a question. Right? This is all sort of part of a question. And Ella is going to offer you really an answer or an alternative response. And here's the rest of the answer. Okay, moving on. Tolada de Karen Maihi. What is a tolada of Karen? So given that we've established that Karen is an av, so what, Mai is what is the tolada of Karen? And the answer is Nigifa, Nishicha, Revitza, Ubita. There are 4 apparently. Nigifa is sort of like the animal running into you. Nishicha is biting. Revitza is crouching or the animal sitting on someone or something. And Bita is kicking. So all of those are potential toladot of Karen. Maishna Nigicha Dekari la'av dichtiv ki yigach Nigifa nami ktiv ki yigof. Here's a question. What's the difference between nigicha, goring, which is called an av, because it says ki yigach, right? We learned earlier that avot are generally written in the Torah, so it says ki yigach. But nigifa nami is also written in the Torah, because it says ki yigof, which I have this pasuk down here also, and you can see that that both are mentioned right here. Later in Perek Chafal, it says ki yigof shor ish. When an animal does this to a person, does this injuring, colliding, running into, or trampling, whatever you want to call it, that's mentioned also. So why is that different? Why is that not also an av? Hai negifa negichahi. This negifa, this colliding that's mentioned, is actually negicha. It's just called negifa in the pasuk, but it's actually the same as negicha, as goring. Titania, as we learned in a Braita, patach b'negifa v'siyem b'negicha. The Torah, the section of the Torah that discusses this, opens with negifa, with trampling or colliding with, and ends with negicha, ends with goring. Lomar lacha zohi negifa, zohi negicha. To explain to you that they're really the same thing. This is a Braita, and again, sort of explaining the pasuk in the Torah, or the psukim in the Torah, as meaning that negifa and negicha are essentially the same thing. Maishna gabe adam dichtiv ki yigach, umaishna gabe behema dichtiv ki yigof. So obviously, if it's using the same 2 different words to mean the same thing, we want to know, well, why does it use 2 different words to mean the same thing? And specifically, what's the difference such that regarding a person, it says ki yigach, that's in the pasuk that I showed you, from Shemot Chaf Aleph Lamed Hey, from the earlier pasuk in Shemot, ki yigach, right, it talks about goring a person, but when it comes to an animal, it says ki yigof. So why the difference? Adam de'itle mazala ktiv ki yigach. A person who has kind of like agency, they have the ability to think things through and do things for themselves. It says ki yigach when they get gored. Behema deleitle mazala ktiv ki yigof. But an animal who doesn't have that kind of agency, it says ki yigof. Sort of the colliding should be something that you can avoid more easily, colliding with an animal, whereas getting gored, that's something that is maybe not as easy for even a human being to avoid. So I'm putting this as the question, And that's the answer. Umilta agav orche kamash malan. Kamash malan means it teaches us. Milta agav orche, milta is a thing or a word. Agav orche is by the way or along the way. So this teaches us an additional lesson sort of along the way. Right? We learned something extra from this ki gach and ki gof piece. Mu'ad la'adam have mu'ad lebehema. Umu'ad lebehema lo have mu'ad la'adam. That if an ox is considered mu'ad, it's considered an ox that has gored before for the purposes of goring a person, we also consider it as being mu'ad for an animal. Meaning if it's attacked people before, we assume it might attack an animal. But if it's just attacked animals before, we don't consider it likely to attack a person. So that's something that the ki gach, ki gof distinction teaches us as well. In addition to teaching us that one type of injury is more likely for people than for animals, or vice versa, but it doesn't indicate a different category, and that's really the thrust of the Gemara's answer here. That Nigifa is one of the avot of Karen. Is one of the toladot of Karen, but it's the same as Nigicha. So it can be called Nigifa and still include Nigicha, which confusingly those words sound the same. This I'm going to put as an explanation, and we'll go on. Nishicha tolada deshenhi. Is Nishicha a tolada of Shen? Right? Wouldn't you think, Nishicha, which is listed as a tolada of Karen, wouldn't you think that that's a tolada of Shen, of tooth? Lo, nope, it's not. Shen yesh hana'al hazika, ha'ein hana'al hazika. Shen, definitional to the av of Shen, is that there is enjoyment for the animal in doing the damaging. But here, there's no hana'ah in doing the damaging. Biting, just nishicha, the animal doesn't get enjoyment, doesn't get benefit out of the damaging. It's just a bite. It's not an eating kind of bite. So I'm going to put this as the answer, and this is the question. Revitza u'bi'ita tolada deregel hi. Aren't revitza and bi'ita, crouching or sitting down on a person and kicking, aren't those toladot of regel, of the leg, and not of Karen? Lo, nope, we're not going to think about it that way. Regel hezika matsui. Regel, a characteristic of regel is that its nezek is frequent, is common. It's a very frequent form of nezek. Hani ein hezikan matsui, whereas revitza and bi'ita are more uncommon. Ella tolotehen lav kiyotzi behen. Rather, these toladot are not like them. De'amar Rav Papa, ahaya. So rather, the ones where the toladot, the cases where the toladot are not like the avot, which Rav Papa mentioned, ahaya, about which ones are these speaking? Meaning we need to identify toladot that are not like the avot. We haven't identified that category yet. Or have we, right? Which ones are we talking about? Ilema ahani, if you were to say that it's about these categories that we already mentioned. Maishna Karen de kavanato lahazik, umamancha ushmirato alecha. If we were talking about these that we've already mentioned, what's the difference between Karen, which includes intent to do damage, and your money, it's your property, it's mamoncha, the shore is your property, and shmirato alecha, and you're responsible for watching it. Hani nami kavanatan lahazik. These toladot also, their intent is to do damage, umamoncha, and they're your property, ushmiratan alecha, and they are your responsibility to watch. Ella tolada de Karen ke Karen. Rather, we have to say that it seems from everything we've discussed, the tolada of Karen is just like Karen, right? When we looked at the toladot of Karen, That's what was discussed over here, right? Tolada to Karen Maihi. It doesn't seem like these are significantly different from Karen. We have an Av and we have Toladot, but it seems the Toladot are a lot like the Av. We haven't found a significant difference. So in which case was Rav Papa saying that there's something about the Toladot that's different from the Avot? So, Ki Kama Rav Papa Ashen V'Regel. So it must be that Ki here is when Rav Papa said the thing that he said, that some Avot are that some Toladot are like the Avot and some are different, he must have been talking about Shen and Regel. Okay, we'll stop there.